We are officially in the age of remakes and remasters. Movies, games, whatever this abomination is. All of the big entertainment companies are trying to cash in on our nostalgia. That's nothing new, but it feels more aggressive now. And that got me thinking, why are these games so hyped and so successful? And why do we sometimes put more stock into them over new games? I'm Ouroboros. Let's talk. Alright, so let's go ahead and establish this. Remasters are games that have been upscaled or otherwise had graphical improvements and brought to modern consoles. They may contain little improvements and changes here and there, but they are 99% the same game. These will usually have something like HD at the end of the title. These aren't to be confused with definitive editions, which typically include all of the DLCs. Remakes, on the other hand, are built from the ground up with large changes to even the core gameplay. So think like the Final Fantasy VII Remake. These use the original game as a sort of conceptual foundation, and then build a modern game around it. Unfortunately, these definitions aren't set in stone, and we do have some weird outliers. Xenoblade Definitive Edition should be considered a remaster, even though it looks significantly better than the original. Nothing in the main game changes, but they have added an all-new epilogue story with a new area that was cut from the original game. The lines do tend to get blurred, but you can usually lump any re-released game into one of these two categories. With that out of the way, let's just have a nice casual chat about why these are so popular now. And it comes down to a very simple and logical explanation. They make a lot of money. And with remasters, they tend to not cost very much. Game development costs have skyrocketed over the past few decades. And hey, guess what? Studios aren't run by developers. They're run by executives and businessmen. Honestly though, I don't really mind studios putting out remasters every so often. It can help fund new games, and it's not like they really take that much time to develop. Plus, I really only buy the remakes I'm super invested in. However, I do wish some of these had a bit more thought put into them. Like, if you're gonna bring these games forward, maybe put in some small quality of life changes. I was playing Skyward Sword HD, and you can only save and warp at these bird statues. Kind of annoying, but okay, whatever. I can just turn off my Switch and keep playing again. And they're pretty common, so it's not the biggest deal in the world, but you can only choose to go back up into the sky when you're on the surface. Why can't I just warp between the different areas on the surface? There are a few instances throughout the game where you have to travel between different areas for the main story or a few side quests. So instead of just warping between, let's say, Faron to Lanayru and back to Faron, you have to go to Faron, go into the sky, fly over to Lanayru, go to Lanayru, back to the sky, fly to Faron, then back to Faron. Like, it's such a simple change. Why didn't they add this in? The sky is basically just a fancy level select anyway. There's nothing up there. I also wish they focused more on updating some of the textures. A lot of the main characters look fine, but there are so many muddy environmental textures. But anyway, remakes are a whole different story. They're almost like an entirely new game if you look at something like the FF7 remake, which I still haven't played because it's $70 on Steam? Why is it so expensive? This is a 4-year-old game. Okay, well, since I haven't played it, I'll talk about Persona 3 Reload. It's a fantastic remake. It adds tons of new scenes, new mechanics, new areas. It looks fantastic, both technically and aesthetically. This is where my preference lies for remakes and remasters. It takes an old and outdated game and brings it forward to the modern era while adding in new things. And with the eventual addition of the Episode Igus DLC, it will soon be the definitive way to experience P3. I swear to God, if I see someone in the comments to Rent and Reload not having the FemC, I will ban you from this channel faster than I got banned from my favorite arcade for throwing air hockey paddles at that little jerk Timmy. These types of remakes are the ones I'm happy paying more money and waiting longer for. They feel like new games, right? Yeah, I know mostly what's gonna happen throughout the story, but the gameplay and small moments are drastically different. What's cool with these two types of re-releases is that they can work hand in hand to sustain each other. Studios can release simple remasters to help fund larger remakes. You could honestly have a whole team dedicated to working on this type of schedule. This is kind of what Atlus does with their main Persona games. They will take a really long time to release main games. I mean, Persona 4 came out in 2008, and Persona 5 came out in 2016, and we haven't had any more mainline games since then. Which, again, I'm perfectly fine with. They come out with fun little spin-offs like the Dancing and Q series to fill in the gaps, plus all of the expanded editions of each game. While I haven't gotten around to any of these spin-offs yet, it helps keep the studio afloat between the big releases. It's the same thing with remakes and remasters. Obviously, it would have to be a big company like Nintendo or Sony with tons of IPs to make this work, but it's possible. Unfortunately, remasters sometimes end up being lazily made ports of existing games, but they still elicit the sense of nostalgia that we're all looking for. I'm not saying that catering to nostalgia is inherently a bad thing. People like to throw around that word like it's some terrible thing, but it's almost cathartic to experience something again 10 to 15 years later. It takes you back to the good old days or whatever. When times were simpler, when times were easier. Of course, they weren't, but that's how you remember them. And for a brief period in time, you feel like a child again. Going through the same world, now equipped with new experience and information, it's a sign of growth. You've grown as a player, and the world has grown with you. That's what remakes and remasters offer to us. And some people just need that. Not all remakes and remasters are nostalgia bait. Not all remakes and remasters are masterpieces, but at the end of the day, games are all about having fun. Games are still new. I don't want to say they're in their infancy, but maybe we're like in the adolescent stages. We're experimenting around a little bit, maybe trying some motion controls, maybe trying out VR. We don't want to go back to our childish roots, but as we grow up, we realize that, yeah, maybe those old things weren't so bad to begin with. Maybe those bad things were actually pretty good. They may not be perfect, but just like that cult classic that everybody hates and you still love, you go back to it time and time again. Despite everything, remakes and remasters offer that consistent experience and let us appreciate our old favorites, even on modern hardware. Thanks for watching.